We are continuing our study in the book of John. We are going to be in chapter 4 tonight. We've been starting to discuss some of the summer activities that are coming up, and VBS particularly. And we're going to start making more announcements as we go forward as far as opportunities to help and so forth. But if you do have bigger boxes, we probably are going to need them. So if you kind of keep and bring them in or whatever, that would be helpful. We've got some big plans as far as the front of the auditorium and even down the auditorium, so cardboard would be probably useful. There are a couple things, and we'll just make mention really quickly, things we've been talking about as far as inviting and encouraging and so forth. All these events right now are currently on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, they're on the website as well. If you have the opportunity, if you do that kind of thing, just share them from time to time. Encourage people to be with us and join us for those things. But tonight, we're in the book of John, chapter 4. We're talking about a story that is, it hits so many different levels as far as culture and theology and, of course, Christian thought and theology, but especially on the idea of worship. So we are going to talk about some cultural things. We're going to talk about the reality of Jesus, just kind of breaking down a lot of those barriers, which he constantly does. But ultimately, we want to see the idea of what he says about worship itself. So we're in chapter 4, and we're just going to notice the first few verses here and then kind of set the stage, if you would. Verse 1 says, "Therefore, when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had heard that Jesus made and baptized more disciples than John, though Jesus himself did not baptize but his disciples, he left Judea and departed again to Galilee, but he needed to go through Samaria." All right, I probably should put a picture of the map up here, but he needed to go through Samaria. Now, what was significant about the relationship between Samaria and Judah, or the Samaritans and the Jews?
They didn't like one another.
Yeah, they didn't like one another. Why?
They didn't like anybody with pure loves.
Okay, so from the Jewish side of the fence, they saw the Samaritans as kind of half, and they weren't pure. And that came from going all the way back before Babylonian captivity, back in the days of Solomon, when he built all those idols and so forth. When he died, his son Rehoboam came to the throne, and he thought that he would keep control by putting a lot of pressure on people. Well, another man named Jeroboam, and if you didn't like your name, just think your parents could name you that. He led off 10 tribes in the north and separated from Judah. Those northern 10 tribes became known as Israel, the southern 2, Judah and Benjamin, as Judah. And those northern 10 tribes eventually get carried off by the Assyrians. The Assyrians had a very unique way of conquering lands and people when they did it. Those who they didn't kill or torture or whatever, they would take people and they would mix them so that they weren't in the same place with the rest of their people. So if they conquered some people from Egypt, they might dump some of them in Palestine, Israel, and Judah, that area. They might dump some up in Macedonia, and then take people from Macedonia and put them in, Judah and down in Egypt or Ethiopia. They'd mix them. Why do you suppose they would do that?
It's harder to get an uprising or a
rebellion. It's exactly why they did it. So it kept people from being unified. They had language barriers, they had culture barriers, they had religious barriers, and most of the time they would be more, fighting and not getting along together to then get together and revolt against the Assyrians. So that's what they did. What ended up happening in Samaria then is the people got mixed with all these, plus the idol worship that was already there, and tenets of truth that kind of lingered, and got mixed into this hodgepodge. They believed as a religion in the Torah, the first 5 books. They probably had some interesting interpretations of some of that, but they didn't believe in any of the Old Testament beyond that. They coupled their religion with the idols of the area. Okay, so they became both in physical nature because they were married and so forth, all these different groups and whatever, as well as religious. So the Jews saw them as even possibly being worse than the Gentiles, which they also looked down on, right? The Samaritans, from the other side, they saw the Jews in what way?
I guess we would say snobs.
Yeah, there you go. As elitist, as judgmental, as, that kind of view. So neither side liked each other. We're going to have this happen not only here, but with the story of the Good Samaritan too. Some very pivotal and powerful spiritual lessons, and the center person is going to be a Samaritan. So when you're talking to Jewish people, what is that going to do? It's going to get their attention. Okay? So, and not that that's our story, but if you remember in the story of the Good Samaritan, when the man fell among thieves, he was very specific that a Levite and a priest passed him by. And you would say, well, those are the same thing. Yeah, all priests were Levites, were supposed to be, but not all Levites were priests. Some of them had other functions and so forth. But the two guys who were supposed to be the men of God passed by, and then who stopped? A Samaritan. And the Samaritan becomes the operative teaching piece to teach the Jews. You know that kind of burns, okay? And we're going to have it here again. Not only are we going to have a Samaritan, but we're going to have a Samaritan with a kind of a checkered past. And Jesus is going to use her to be able to teach not only those in that day, but also us. So here's going back to it. He must go through Samaria. The Jews didn't travel unless they absolutely had to through Samaria. They go all the way around into the land of Galilee to avoid touching soil and defiling themselves by walking into Samaria. This is not because he had no choice but to go through Samaria, but because he needed to meet this woman at the well. Okay? So when we're looking at this, but he needed to go through Samaria, again, his disciples wouldn't understand that. The Jewish people wouldn't understand that. Everybody goes around. This is not what you do. Okay? So we set it up. It's kind of a divine appointment. He breaks these social barriers starting here, and we're going to see it happen more. He's going to arrive at noon, 6 hours. We didn't read that part, but let's go ahead. Verse 5. So he came to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journey, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour. So this is in the middle of the day. Now, you've probably heard this story many, many times. You've looked at these details. Well, let's just refresh ourselves. What's significant about this well? Anything?
It's dug by Jews, wasn't it?
Yep. It was dug by Jacob. It was given to Joseph. Now, what are we talking about here? Who are these people in the Jewish story?
The 12 tribes is what they got. And Joseph is one. Is who.
Right, but Joseph didn't really, his son's kind of got land because remember, he's going to pass away in Egypt. He's not going to go into the land. But that's significance. Joseph was a pillar kind of person to them, right? To both sides. And here's this well that they have made. It's a well, but because of who dug it, it becomes a special place. Do you follow? I've had this conversation so many times with why I believe, this is just my personal belief, why we don't have like the autographs, the original handwritten letters. We have the manuscripts, the copies. Because if we had an autograph, in other words, the exact letter that Paul wrote, you know what people would do with it? They would worship it like it was some kind of talisman. That if they bowed down to it, prayed to it, whatever, it would give them powers. And the reason why I know that is because that's what we do with it. Yeah, people built on top of where they believed Jesus to be both born and buried in two different places. They built these huge cathedral-type places. Well, was there significance to the ground of where he was born? Or really where he was buried? Only in a historical way. The significance is the one who was born and the one who died and was raised, right? But we do that. It's said that Hitler was constantly looking for artifacts and so forth. You see this played out in some of the Indiana Jones stuff. That's where they get that idea from. They're always chasing the Holy Grail and the javelin that pierced Jesus' side and all this stuff, thinking that's going to give them some kind of power, the Ark of the Covenant. And that's what people would do with it. That's what they're doing. They've taken what Jacob had dug, and it was a nice thing. By the way, this well still exists today. You can go to it. Now it's got all kinds of stuff built around it, but it's still there. And this had watered people for and their animals for centuries now, but now it's a sacred place to them. Did God say that was a sacred place? No. Again, we see mankind here. But that's where he is at. He is not just at a random well in the land of Samaria. Okay? Verse 6. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied from his journeys, sat thus by the well. It was about the 6th hour, so noon. Verse 7. A woman of Samaria came to draw water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." Now, again, I'm sure you've all studied this many times. What's significance about the timing here? Anything?
It just wasn't done.
Why wasn't it done?
Well, today we have differences between the black and the white, and there they had differences between the Jewish and the Samaritan.
Okay, so the racial cultural differences, yeah. There's another layer too. Go ahead, Gage.
I was going to say that the ladies, they get their water in the morning.
Yeah.
She comes in the middle of the day.
Right.
Very unusual for that time.
Right. So we have both the cultural differences between the Jews and the Samaritans, and now you have it set up, he's there at noon, and here comes this woman to draw water, and the women generally drew water in the morning and in the evening. Well, why would you do that? Well, in the day, they're preparing and doing all that. It's easier to have the water to start with. You need the water at the end of the day. But also, what's true about the middle of the day? It's hot. So you prefer to carry, I don't know if you've carried much water before. It's not light, is it? Yeah. And you always, if you had to carry like a 5-gallon bucket, we had horses growing up. We were constantly having to carry water here and there. Even when I lived in Florida, it was a whole lot easier if you had 2 of them, kind of mount you. Otherwise, you're walking like this all the time. But it's not light, so it was just easier. All the women tended to go. They would talk. They would commute. They have this kind of fellowship almost around that. She is not there. She's not a part of that. Now we're going to learn why possibly later, but that already sets up the story as what? She is okay. I believe that's true, but she is avoiding people. Okay, do you follow me? So she doesn't want to deal with it. She's avoiding people, and who's she run up to? She's going to run up to Jesus, the Son of God, which I find she doesn't know that at first, but anyway. So there he is, there she is, and then we're going to keep reading here. Verse 8. He asked for a drink of water in verse 7. His disciples had gone away into the city to buy food, and then the woman of Samaria said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? For Jews have no dealings with Samaritans." We just talked about that. By the way, it was also taboo if you were a man to talk to a woman in public who was not a family member. That was not considered good manners. You were respectful, you would nod, you'd wave, but you wouldn't necessarily, unless you had to have a conversation. So you have a lot of things going on here that break the cultural norms. But she recognizes that he's a Jew. What gave it away?
His nose.
Wow, I don't know what to do with that.
That was an inside joke from school. So.
Oh, okay.
Nobody else got that.
Oh, now I got you. Okay, yeah. Well, we have a new baseball team, and a couple of our players can't seem to understand you don't play baseball with your face. And they may have been picking at the latest one a little bit. But anyway, you threw me off, Charlie.
Sorry.
You're good. You're good. What was I even saying?
How do you tell her?
Oh, yeah. there was something, right? In other words, there's a distinction between them. She could recognize that he was a Jewish man. And so she's like, why would you ask me? And the next part of this conversation, which is behind me, is so important. Jesus answered and said, verse 10, to her, if you knew the gift of God and who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. So when we're looking at this, there is some Old Testament kind of pools here with the living water idea. We'll have to leave that for another time. But when you're looking at the physical and the spiritual again, remember with last time we were together and we studied, we were talking about Nicodemus and Jesus, and we were talking the difference between what? The physical and the spiritual. So again, we're in that kind of dynamic. He is thirsty physically. They're at a physical well, so it's not hard to think, well, she's thinking physical things, but he is offering her spiritual. I want you to look at the very first part of that statement. If you knew the gift of God, what's he referencing there?
Himself.
Good. Okay. So, Jimmy, I think that's what we miss sometimes. The gift of God, yes, it's salvation. That's a great gift of God. The gift of God is Jesus. He's in her presence. He is in her space. He is in the world. He is the gift that she needed. She doesn't know that yet, right? What she can offer, what he can give her, what he can provide to her is life. She's going to have to learn that in this context. It's going to take us into a picture of how do we worship. And that's why I believe that the gift he's talking about, yes, we can say salvation. We're not saying wrong, okay? But it is Jesus himself, because the worship is going to be aimed not at the physical again, but at what instead? If you can read ahead, you remember what's ahead here. When she asks him about worshiping on this mountain or this mountain, and he says, neither, there's time coming, now is, when God the Father will seek such that worship him in what? Spirit and in truth, right? What is Jesus? He's the embodiment of that. Okay? So in this context, what we need to see is the offer of living water, but we need to see that it's so powerful because of who Jesus is. But let's just put a little bit more on those bones. If you knew the gift of God and who it is, see? And who it is who says to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. The woman said to him, sir, you have nothing to draw with and the well is deep. Where then do you get that living water? All right. She is thinking in what way? Physical. We're at a well. Makes sense. He's the one that asked her for a drink because he has nothing to draw water from. So she's like, this doesn't make sense. Remember, just like Nicodemus, how can a man who's old go back into his mother's womb? That's impossible. It's impossible for you to offer me this water. You have nothing to draw from. Where are you going to get this water from? And, of course, Jesus is going to answer her. So, verse 12. She continues to ask on this wavelength. Where then do you get that living water? Verse 12. And are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as well as his sons and his livestock? Okay. I personally am going to give my thought on this and make sure that I want to caveat as this is personal. Sometimes it's really hard to understand inflection when you have a text. Is she asking a sarcastic question? Or is she catching a hint of something and asking a real question? I can't 100% answer that. Here's a version if she's being sarcastic, she's continuing the thought beforehand. You have nothing to use. You're a Jew. You seem to be kind of out of it. Why are you asking me these things? Do you think you're better than these things? But notice how she went straight to those spiritual things. If she's catching on a little bit, everlasting water, whatever there, and she's asking, wait a minute, are you saying you're what? Greater than Jacob. In other words, is it inquisitive? Like, okay, well, who are you claiming to be? I actually believe it's that way. because of the way the structure of the conversation goes. Now, if you believe it's the other one, she's being sarcastic, whatever, that's fine. I speak sarcasm. I like it. I speak it all the time. But
just trying to make sense of it.
yeah, but I do think she's catching on. That's the thing. And here's the difference that I think is why I want to make this point, is because how many times when he goes to the Jews who should know better, they don't get it. And yet he goes to this Samaritan woman who's trying to avoid people, is there, doesn't understand why he would be talking to him. All of a sudden, get this inkling, wait a minute, there's something going on here. Keep reading with me. We'll see if that makes some sense. But she asked, verse 12 again, are you greater than our father Jacob? In verse 13, Jesus answered and said to her, whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. You ever notice that Jesus sometimes doesn't directly answer questions? It's an interesting observation. Maybe for another time we can dig into that deeper. But she asked, are you greater? Instead of answering it directly, what is he going to do? He's going to try to show her. Okay? So look at verse 13 again. Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again. Verse 14. But whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst. But the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water that I may not thirst nor come here to draw. And of course, physical there. And Jesus said to her, go call your husband and come here. So now we're going to start into another branch of thought that's going to end up into this worship. This idea of everlasting water that he's offering her. How many times have we had this picture of those who hunger and thirst after God? Right? It's in the parable. It's in the Beatitudes. Blessed are those who what? Hunger and thirst for righteousness. Right? For God. But there's another thing I want you to see, and I'm going to try to, in 15 minutes, pull this in. We're going to go senior level class on this, but I hope that you find it interesting. I want you to go back to a book that you probably never would think to go on this, the book of Ezekiel. Go all the way back to the Old Testament book of Ezekiel with me for a moment. Well, for a couple minutes. Ezekiel is a prophet. It is a crazy book. If you want an interesting, kind of crazy laid out book, the book of Ezekiel is. And it's written because this prophet is in the time right before Babylonian captivity, right into Babylonian captivity. God's trying to get the people's attention. And he has Ezekiel do some crazy stuff. And there's some crazy pictures in there. But there's also, in the latter part, this beautiful picture of the future blessings of God. Okay? So if we started in verse 40, we have this, or chapter 40, we have this beautiful picture of the new city of God. Okay? The new heaven. We have the new sanctuary, all these things. We're not going to have time to develop all this. And he lays out like it's this big, beautiful place. The temple's the Lord's dwelling place. And we pair that with what Jesus talks about, the temple being him, and so forth, and eventually being the church. We have some things to build on there too. I'm trying to take us, though, to chapter 47. Turn to chapter 47. That whole section is talking about all these pictures of the temple. If you had time to study it alongside of Daniel, which we already did, and then study the book of Revelation in light of what Jesus taught, you start to understand the spiritual pictures that are trying to be presented here. But there's one that I want you to see. Before we do that, how do water tables work? Right, a little science class. It rains, what happens to the water? Okay, but there's too much water for the ground to absorb. Where does it go?
The lowest.
It's going to go to the lowest place. Eventually, that lowest place is going to build a little stream or a creek. That stream or creek, it can't hold all the water, so the water's going to continue to go to the lowest. It's going to flow down to what?
The next stream.
The next stream. And what ends up happening? They get bigger, and you get a river. And then rivers run into rivers, and you get something like the Mississippi. So the Mississippi starts where? In Missouri, I think? And it starts with a small spring, and it comes down, and as it comes down, it gets bigger as things contribute into it. It gets thick, it gets more water volume, it gets bigger, the Ohio River dumps into it, the Cumberland River dumps into it, however, and then many rivers dump into it until it's this huge body of water by the time you get to the Gulf. Okay? That water comes from something, right? Something is contributing to that water as it goes down. It gets bigger and bigger. I want you to keep that in mind because we're going to see a very unique river here. And we're going to go back to that picture. Chapter 47. An angel is bringing the prophet around to see these things. Look at verse 1. Then he brought me back to the door of the temple, and there was water flowing under the threshold of the temple towards the east. For the front of the temple faced east, and the water was flowing from under the right side of the temple, south of the altar. You don't have to pay attention to all the east directions and all that stuff. I just want you to pay attention to the idea of the water as it flows, what it does. Okay? Verse 2. And he brought me out by the way of the north gate, and led me around on the outside to the outer gateway that faces east, and there was water running out on the right side. And then when the man went out to the east with the line in his hand, he measured 1,000 cubits, and he brought me through the water. The water came up to my ankles. Again, he measured 1,000 and brought me through the waters, and the water came up to my knees. Again, he measured 1,000, brought me through, the water came up to my waist. And then again, he measured 1,000, and it was a river that I could not cross, for the water was too deep, water in which one must swim, a river that could not be crossed. Okay? This is how rivers work, right? They start off small, but watch as we keep reading. Verse 6. He said to me, Son of man, have you seen this? And then he brought me and returned me to the bank of the river. And when I returned there, along the bank of the river were very many trees on one side and the other. And then he said to me, This water flows towards the eastern region, goes down into the valley, and enters the sea. When it reaches the sea, its waters are healed. And it shall be that every living thing that moves, wherever the rivers go, will live. There will be a very great multitude of fish, because these waters go there. For they will be healed, and everything will live wherever the river goes. A magical river, right? It shall be that the fishermen will stand by it, and En-gedi to En-gelim, and they will be places for spreading their nets. Their fish will be of the same kinds as the fish of the great sea, exceedingly many. But in swamps and marshes will not be healed. They will be given over to salt. Well, we don't have time to develop that. Verse 12. Along the bank of the river, on this side and that, will grow all kinds of trees used for food. Their leaves will not wither, and their fruit will not fall. They will bear fruit every month, because their water flows from the sanctuary. Where does it come from? The sanctuary. Remember that, okay? Their fruit will be for food, their leaves for medicine. The picture is water coming down, and everything it touches and everywhere it goes, it blesses. Y'all follow that? The trees are fruitful, the fish become many, all those who are sustained off it are well, and so forth. The water comes from the sanctuary. The sanctuary is what part of the temple? What does sanctuary mean?
Gathering place is where the biggest.
Okay, it used to oftentimes talking about a sanctuary, but it means a holy place. Okay? And so it kind of uses that dynamic in expressing that. But if you think about the temple, the holy place is where the priests do their work. Okay, I want you to go back with me to John chapter 4. And I want you to read again and think with me as we talk about this water that Jesus, I'm in the wrong book, promised this woman and what it does. He first said, if you knew the gift of God. Then he said, down in verse 14, Whoever drinks of the water that I shall give him will never thirst, but the water that I shall give him will become in him a fountain of water springing up into everlasting life. Who's the sanctuary? It's us. And watch what happens. So this woman then is going to go talk to other people. We're going to see this play out actually in this thing. She is brought into a relationship with Christ. In our context, this side of the cross, baptized in, becomes a member, becomes all those things. This water comes from the sanctuary, comes from Christ, comes out through her, out through you, out through me, and it flows down. And what should it be doing? It should be blessing everything we touch. How does it grow?
She's looking at two different things. She's looking at satisfying her thirst, and then she doesn't want to come all the time to get water.
Sure. Right. So going back to this picture, if it's a physical, then it would solve her problem, right? She wouldn't have to go back and get water. Spiritually, I do want us to see if we can grab a hold of this, because again, it is something that's beyond. This idea of the temple in the book of Ezekiel is fulfilled in the church, not in some future state. The whole idea is that as we are brought into this relationship to drink from this living water, that it overflows and it turns into this fountain and it gets deeper, right? And it blesses. And as I bless someone else and they come to know, and they bless someone else and they come to know, that water gets deeper and wider and has its impact. I'm going to show you this actually plays out in the story. Now, why is that significant? Well, that sounds crazy and a lot of deep theology, because this is how it's supposed to work. Watch what happens. We're going to get to this conversation. We're going to skip the slides for now because I'm just going to have to do this a little bit quicker because of time. He's going to say, okay, go get your husband. Now, again, I told you it's not normal for a man to have a deep conversation with a woman in public. That's kind of taboo, so we could push it off to there. But Jesus knows what he's doing. So when he says, she says, verse 17, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, you have well said, I have no husband, for you have had 5 husbands, and the one whom you now have is not your husband, and that you spoke truly. So she's had 5 husbands. I'm going to say one quick thing here, and then I'm just going to put it out there so we wait. Every time we come here, we see this woman as what? What do we see her as? Okay. I want to remind us that in the Samaritan world and in the Jewish world, a woman cannot divorce her husband. So, either she was and 5 husbands put her away, or we have a series of a woman being mistreated and being thrown to the side. And both may be true. So I'm not trying to give her, anything. I'm just saying we need to make sure we see the whole picture of possibility here. But she is a broken woman. Okay? And he brings us out. And she says, okay, I don't have a husband. And he says, yeah, you've had 5 and you're living with this man. You're not married to him. And she gets upset and storms away. Right? No. Look what happens. The woman said to him, Sir, verse 19, I perceive that you are a prophet. Man, if they said something about a tradition to some of these Jewish leaders, they were ready to pick up stones. This man, Jesus just called out her whole life. And she says what?
You're a prophet.
I see that you're a prophet. How many times are we afraid to talk to people with broken lives because we're afraid they won't listen to us? And yet Jesus every time seems to pick out those people, and they're the ones who tend to listen. Because they know the weight of their brokenness. That's for another time. But look back at this so we can end in a good spot here. Verse 19, she asked, I perceive that you're a prophet. What does she do? She turns it to worship. Look at verse 20. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and you Jews say that in Jerusalem is a place where one ought to worship. And Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem, that's Mount Gerizim, by the way, that they're at, worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. So he does two things. One, he is going to correct her error. But two, he's inviting her into a conversation that's much deeper. Look at verse 23. Let's see if I can get this. And 24. But the hour is coming, and now is, when the true worshiper will worship the Father in spirit and truth, for the Father is seeking such to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. And the woman said to him, I know that Messiah is coming. Look where she keeps going. She keeps going where? Deeper. I want to know more. So we've heard about Messiah. And for the very first time in the book of John, he's going to openly recognize himself as the Messiah to a Samaritan woman with a broken background at a well. What does he say? Verse 25, the woman said to him, I know the Messiah is coming. When he comes, he will tell us all things. Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he. Now, again, we've hit time, and I hate that, but look, the very next thing she does. And at this point, his disciples came, and they marveled that he talked with a woman, all that stuff. Yet no one said, what do you seek, or why are you talking to her? The woman then left her water pot, went her way into the city, and said to them, come see a man who told me all things that I ever did. Could this be the Christ? They went out of the city and came to him. In the meantime, they're having this conversation. I'm going to skip over that. There's some important stuff in there just time-wise. They're asking about food and so forth. Look at verse 35. Do you not say there are still 4 months and then comes the harvest? Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look at the fields, for they are already white for harvest. And he who reaps receives wages and gathers fruit for eternal life, that both he who sows and he who reaps may rejoice together. For in this the saying is true, one sows, another reaps. I sent you to reap for which you have not labored, others have labored, which you have not reaped, right? And many of the Samaritans, verse 39, of the city believed in him because of the word of the woman. This big crowd that this woman just went and told are coming across the field. And if you can imagine, they have these, wouldn't be true white, but basically white, the robes and the head coverings to keep them out of the sun, all that coming across. It looked like the white heads of a harvest ready. What happened with the living word as he gave it to her? Yeah, and now you have this huge crowd coming. This is how it's supposed to work. When we realize the blessing that we have, when we realize what God has given us, the gift he has given us of his Son, of our salvation, of our forgiveness, of our relationship with him, it should flow from us into others. That's how it's supposed to work. Okay? And here we see it, and it's modeled for us by the most unlikely person, which God seems to like to do, isn't it? So here's an idea that I want you to kind of turn around your brain. If you think you're the most unlikely person, guess what? You're exactly who God intends to do this stuff. We sometimes just depend on the idea of how the world works, and that's how things should work, but that is not how it works. When we are blessed and we understand our blessing, see, she understood it. Did she understand it completely? No. She understood enough that he was the Messiah, and she went on to tell people. Sounded like Peter or Andrew, didn't it? As soon as he found out he was the Messiah, where'd he go? He went and told people. I want to end with this thought, and we kind of introduce some ideas that hopefully we can come back to and develop that whole picture of the temple. When we start talking about end time things, when we start to understand these veins of thought all the way through, we'll understand that the significance and the beauty and the power that God has already displayed in his kingdom, which the subjects are of the church. But for us individually tonight, have we drank of that water? Same water Jesus offered her. Have we drank of that everlasting water that's going to bless us and overflow in us? Do we hunger and thirst for righteousness? If we have, I have a question. Just a simple one, silly one. Are we like the river where the water flows and continues to bless? Are we like a cork? And God's blessings stop with us. When we talk about evangelism and discipleship and all that, that's what it is. It's time to pull the cork. Whatever small way, whatever big way, we need to let those things flow from us and through us into others. Obviously, the gospel is the main way we do that, teaching people about Jesus, about the steps that it takes to be saved. I understand that. But all that comes through that, all that idea of everlasting water, this is where we are sustained. We're sustained in God. Tonight, if you're with us and have need, though, we've gone over a little bit. I apologize for that. And we can be of help. We can come beside you in prayer. Or if there is someone who needs to obey the gospel tonight, we want to give you the opportunity to let those needs be known as we stand and sing a song of